What if every text you waited for wasn't about love, but survival? What if that ache in your chest wasn't a sign of devotion, but a warning signal from your nervous system, screaming that your identity is entangled in someone else's presence? We call it love. We defend it as loyalty. But under the microscope of the unconscious, it begins to reveal a far more disturbing truth. Most of us are not in love. We are in fear, clinging to validation as if it were oxygen. Fear wears many masks. It can disguise itself as longing, sacrifice, passion, or even romantic obsession. But underneath the poetry, there is panic, the fear of being left, the fear of being invisible, the fear that if someone doesn't choose us, we cease to exist. So we perform, we shrink, we chase. We say, "I love you," but what we mean is, "Please stay, so I don't have to face myself alone." Have you ever stayed in a relationship not because it nourished you, but because walking away felt like death? That's not love. That's fear of the void. And that void, the silence after disconnection, the space without distraction, is where your real self lives, waiting to be reclaimed. But to meet it, you must be willing to lose the illusion, to stop calling dependency destiny, to stop calling anxiety butterflies. This is not a condemnation of your heart. It's an invitation to look deeper, because true love does not tremble when they don't text back. True love doesn't keep you awake at night, rehearsing how to be more acceptable, more agreeable, more easy to love. True love doesn't break your spirit just to keep a connection alive. That is fear, and fear always demands sacrifice, the sacrifice of your authenticity, your voice, your peace. Carl Jung taught that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. If we don't examine the roots of our attachments, we will keep mistaking wounding for romance. We will build relationships on trauma patterns and call it chemistry. But chemistry is not a connection, and suffering is not proof of love. So ask yourself, with courage and compassion, what part of my love is actually fear dressed up in longing? What part of my devotion is a strategy to avoid abandonment? What part of my loyalty is just emotional self-neglect? This moment, this uncomfortable pause, is the beginning of real freedom. Because when you begin to see the difference between love and fear, you begin to see yourself clearly for the first time. And that clarity is the first breath of self-love, not rooted in survival, but in sovereignty. Let this question echo through the chambers of your heart. If it wasn't fear, what would love feel like? Why do we stay addicted to someone we know is not right for us? That's the question many carry silently, especially when love begins to feel more like withdrawal than warmth. You see the red flags, you hear the silence after your needs are dismissed. You cry after they leave and still wait for their return. You tell yourself this is love, but your nervous system screams something else. If you've ever begged for someone's attention, if you've ever twisted your truth just to stay connected, you're not alone. These moments feel like madness, but what if they're not? What if they're symptoms of something deeper, something Jung saw not as love, but as a haunting repetition of unhealed pain? In the grip of attachment, the body trembles like it's starving. The longing becomes physical. The mind replays every memory, trying to find what you did wrong, what you could have done differently. Days without them feel unbearable, even when their presence was filled with emotional volatility. You know this isn't healthy, but the idea of letting go feels like erasing your entire sense of self. That's because, at the psychological level, many people don't fall in love. They fall into familiar wounds. Jung believed that the unconscious mind seeks out what is unresolved, So if your inner child was emotionally neglected, criticized, or forced to perform for affection, you will unconsciously crave the one who makes you feel the same emptiness, just to reenact the past in hopes of changing its ending. But here lies the trap. The person you're clinging to isn't your salvation. They're a mirror of your wound. In Jung's words, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So we call it soulmate when it's actually shadow mate. They awaken the very ache we've buried. And instead of facing it, we grasp onto them like a lifeline, hoping they'll fill the void they triggered. This is why attachment often feels like addiction. It doesn't come from fullness, but from lack, not from love, but from emotional hunger. This is the difference between love and possession. Love nourishes, but possession consumes. Love breathes, but attachment suffocates. When we confuse fear with love, we enter what Jung might call an emotional trance, a state where the other becomes the drug, the fix, the fantasy. Every text becomes dopamine. Every silence feels like punishment. You're not in a relationship. You're in withdrawal, relapsing into someone who represents your unmet need for safety, validation, or worth. And the more unavailable they are, the more desperate you become. Why? Because deep inside, you believe their approval will finally prove you're enough. But what if this belief is the very illusion keeping you trapped? What if the other person isn't the source of love, but the activator of your abandonment wound? And what if your pain doesn't mean you failed, but that your inner child is screaming for you to stop outsourcing your healing? Carl Jung saw love not as fusion, but as individuation. In true love, both people remain whole, but in addiction-like attachment, you dissolve into the other. You abandon yourself to be chosen. You suppress your needs to remain lovable. You shapeshift until you forget your original form. This is not love. This is the soul's cry for self-recognition. The one you're clinging to is not your home. You are. So ask yourself, when I miss them, what part of me is really hurting? Is it the adult who knows better or the child who was never seen? When I chase their love, am I seeking truth or trying to rewrite a wound? If they vanished forever, would I disappear too? These questions are not meant to shame, but to awaken. Because the moment you stop begging for love that hurts, you start returning to the self that heals. Healing begins the instant you recognize that you were never unlovable, only unseen. And the most radical act is not winning them back, but choosing to stay with yourself, even in loneliness, especially in the ache. That ache is the initiation. It's your soul detoxing from illusion, from dependency, from the false belief that someone outside you holds the key to your peace. When Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens," he was inviting us to shift our gaze from the person who won't choose us to the person within who already knows the truth. And the truth is simple. Attachment is not love. It is the echo of emptiness. And once you stop mistaking it for intimacy, you will stop feeding the very pattern that breaks your heart. Let others drain for love. You return to the well within. That is where your real healing begins. What if the very act of losing someone is not your downfall, but your doorway to becoming whole? For many of us, letting go feels like failure, a rupture, a collapse, a silent grief that no one else sees. We hold on not because it's right, but because we're terrified of what life means without them. The relationship might have turned cold, chaotic, or even cruel, yet we cling as if their presence holds together the scaffolding of our soul. But does it really? Or is it merely a mask we wear to avoid facing the emptiness we've carried long before they arrived? In everyday life, we see this pattern unfold silently in the lives of strong, outwardly stable individuals. The woman who excels at work but secretly sobs in the car after seeing a message that never came. The man who gives and gives, hoping love will be earned, even though he knows deep down that love freely given should never have to be earned. Or the parent who holds on to an adult child who has clearly chosen distance, all in the name of devotion. What's common among these people is not weakness, but a deep-seated fear. If I let go, will anything be left of me? Carl Jung taught that the self is not something we find in another, but something we uncover by facing our shadow. Those parts of us that feel unworthy of love unless someone else validates them. Often what we think is love is actually attachment, a projection of our own need for healing onto another. We confuse their presence with our wholeness, forgetting that they were never meant to complete us, only to reflect where we still feel incomplete. Letting go, then, is not the end of love. It is the end of illusion. It is the moment we stop searching for salvation in another soul and begin the journey of saving ourselves. When we detach, not in bitterness but in bravery, we are not abandoning love. We are returning to a higher form of it, one that no longer binds, controls, or needs, one that simply is. To love without attachment is to say, I see you clearly, I honor your journey, and I honor mine, even if they no longer walk together. And yes, it hurts. Letting go feels like a spiritual death, especially when your identity has been braided into someone else's choices, moods, or presence. But death, Jung reminded us, is always the forerunner of rebirth. The pain of detachment is the cracking of the inner shell. It is your soul choosing to expand. It is life asking you, will you collapse in their absence, or will you rise in your own presence? Take, for example, the woman who finally stopped texting the man who only responded when it suited him. At first, she spiraled into doubt and shame. But weeks later, something strange happened. Her mornings grew lighter. Her smile became hers again. She picked up the guitar she hadn't touched in years. Her energy returned not because he came back, but because she did. This is the secret power of letting go. It brings you back to yourself. You realize that peace was never something they could give you. It was something they were distracting you from. And in that silence, something sacred emerges. Not loneliness, but solitude. Not loss, but clarity. Not weakness, but sovereignty. So ask yourself gently but honestly, what are you still holding on to that no longer holds you? What part of you believes that love must come with suffering to feel real? What would remain if you stopped trying to fix what's already showing you it's not aligned? Letting go is not the end of love. It is its evolution. The moment you release what was never meant to stay, you create space for what is truly meant to arrive, not in someone else, but in the version of you who is finally free. Have you ever wondered why certain patterns keep repeating in your relationships? Why you keep choosing people who make you feel invisible, or why you stay even when you're hurting? The answer may not lie in the present, but in the part of you that was shaped long before you ever knew what love was supposed to feel like. Beneath your adult self, the one who pays bills, sets boundaries, and gives wise advice to friends, there is a younger version of you still frozen in time, waiting for a kind of love that was never given, still hoping to be chosen without having to perform. This is the wounded inner child. And though you may not hear them, they speak through your choices every day. The woman who silences her needs, so she doesn't seem too needy, is echoing the little girl who was scolded for asking for too much. The man who overworks to be impressive in relationships is carrying the boy who was praised only when he excelled. The partner who panics when texts go unanswered is not irrational. They are reliving the fear of being emotionally abandoned by the ones they loved first. Carl Jung referred to this part of us as the child archetype, the core of innocence and vulnerability buried in our unconscious. But when this archetype is wounded, it becomes a ghost that haunts every adult connection. It whispers, "If I just behave better, maybe they'll stay." Or, "If I give more, maybe I'll finally be enough." The tragedy is not that this inner voice exists, but that we mistake it for truth. So many of our adult dynamics are not between two adults, but between two wounded inner children. One clings, the other runs. One begs for affection, the other withholds it to feel powerful. We call it chemistry, fate, or soul ties, but often it is trauma looping in disguise. And the worst part? We blame ourselves for not being able to just move on, when what is really happening is an inner child trying desperately to finish a story that never had a satisfying ending. Real-life stories reflect this quietly devastating pattern. The successful entrepreneur who thrives in business yet repeatedly falls for emotionally unavailable partners only to feel abandoned again and again. Or the nurturing caregiver who attracts those who take endlessly but give nothing in return, convinced they must earn love through sacrifice. These aren't isolated incidents. They're scripts, written in childhood, rehearsed in adulthood, and rarely questioned until life forces us to. Jung taught that healing begins not with suppressing the past, but by integrating it. That means facing the frightened child within and saying what no one said back then. You were never too much. You were never too sensitive. You never had to prove anything to be worthy. When we give the inner child what it has always longed for, not from others, but from ourselves, we interrupt the cycle. We stop confusing survival strategies for love. We stop negotiating with our own pain. Healing the inner child doesn't happen overnight. It begins with small acts of radical presence. Noticing when you're triggered and tracing the thread back to its source. Feeling the grief of unmet needs instead of shaming yourself for having them. Choosing partners who honor your wholeness instead of confirming your wounds. And most of all, giving yourself the love, safety, and protection that was once withheld. So here is the question that shatters illusions. Is the version of love you're chasing actually the version your inner child was denied? Are you fighting to be chosen by someone now because a part of you still believes that being loved means finally being good enough? And if so, what would it look like to become the one who chooses you every time without condition? When we heal the inner child, we stop looking for parents in our partners. We stop performing, pleading, and tolerating. We stop repeating. And in that quiet return to our original innocence, we reclaim the kind of love that doesn't feel like striving. It feels like coming home. Why does calm love feel suffocating when all we ever wanted was to feel safe? That contradiction haunts many people in silence. They find themselves inexplicably bored, even repelled, by partners who are kind, consistent, and emotionally available. Instead, they feel pulled toward the ones who provoke jealousy, disappear in moments of need, or ignite arguments over nothing, because somehow that chaos feels more alive. But what if that aliveness is not passion, but trauma reenacted? What if the nervous system has confused wounds with worth? Take, for example, a woman who spent her childhood walking on eggshells around an unpredictable parent. In adulthood, she says she wants peace, but finds herself restless in a relationship without fights. She starts testing her partner, starting arguments or withdrawing emotionally, not out of cruelty, but because the absence of chaos feels like abandonment. Stillness reminds her of being invisible, so she sabotages calm love to recreate the storm she once survived. This is not immaturity. This is a body screaming for the familiarity of danger, not because it's safe, but because it's known. Carl Jung warned us, what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. The nervous system memorizes patterns before the mind can understand them. So, when love shows up without intensity or pain, the ego doesn't recognize it as love. It says, "This can't be it. Where's the obsession? Where's the ache?" And we walk away, convinced something is missing. When in truth, what's missing is the chaos we've come to believe proves love is real. This confusion is more common than we think. The high of making up after a fight, the rush when they finally text back, the jealousy that signals we care, these are often mistaken for love's depth. But what if that intensity is just cortisol? What if the craving isn't for love, but for the chemistry of survival? Jung's shadow work helps us see that we often seek relationships not to heal, but to repeat. We're unconsciously drawn to partners who mirror the emotional temperature of our earliest wounds. This is why so many reject steady, calm love. It doesn't match the inner chaos we haven't yet made conscious. And so the cycle continues. We say we want peace, but choose war. We call it passion, but it's actually pain. Healing begins with awareness. Can you recognize the moment you mistake emotional chaos for depth? Can you feel the discomfort of calm love without fleeing it? These are the subtle turning points. They're not as cinematic as grand betrayals or dramatic reconciliations, but they are revolutionary. So ask yourself, is the relationship boring, or is your nervous system finally safe and doesn't know what to do with it? Do you crave the high of chaos or the intimacy of consistency? And most of all, are you ready to make a new kind of love familiar? The kind that doesn't trigger your wounds but allows your soul to exhale? Because until you do, the drama will keep calling you home, and you will answer thinking it's love, when it's only the echo of what you were never given as a child. But the moment you stay with the silence, let love feel stable, and let peace feel alive. That's the moment the addiction ends, and real love begins. What if the greatest love of your life is the one that begins within? That question unsettles many because we've been conditioned to believe love is something we must find in someone else, in a soulmate, in the eyes of another who finally sees us. But what if the real journey is not outward, but inward? What if the love we've been chasing is simply the reflection of the parts of ourselves we have not yet embraced? Many people spend decades believing they are unloved because relationships fail to last. They interpret solitude as punishment, assuming something is wrong with them. But Carl Jung saw solitude differently. He believed true love cannot arise until the inner masculine and feminine are integrated. These are not roles or gendered traits. They are energies within each soul. The masculine protects, focuses, and moves outward. The feminine feels, receives, and connects inward. When these parts are at war inside, we search for someone else to complete the imbalance. We confuse craving with love, emptiness with destiny. Take, for example, a man who always dates women he tries to rescue. He feels needed, powerful, important. But underneath that, he is disconnected from his own inner feminine, the part that needs tenderness, softness, and vulnerability. So he seeks women who mirror what he hasn't accepted in himself. Eventually, these relationships collapse under the weight of unconscious expectation. He doesn't realize he isn't loving her. He is trying to love the lost part of himself through her. Or consider a woman who constantly finds herself drawn to dominant, emotionally unavailable men. She tells herself, "This is chemistry." But really, she has not fully embraced her own inner masculine, the part of her that can protect her boundaries, hold direction, and lead her inner life. And so she unconsciously hands over her power to men who echo the father figure she never felt safe with. This is not love. This is a soul seeking wholeness through someone else's shadow. Jung called this projection. We do not fall in love with others. We fall in love with our own potential projected onto them. Until we withdraw the projection and reclaim our energy, we stay caught in a loop of longing, disillusionment, and loss. But healing comes when we turn inward and ask, what am I expecting them to give me that I have not yet given myself? Is it safety, affection, direction, recognition? These questions are the gateway to integration. And as we begin to nourish these energies inside, inviting the masculine to hold space for the feminine, allowing the feminine to soften the masculine, a deep transformation begins. Suddenly, we are not seeking someone to fix us. We are not begging to be chosen. We are choosing ourselves. This is not selfishness. This is spiritual maturity. From this wholeness, love shifts. It becomes expansive, not restrictive. It feels like a gentle unfolding, not a desperate grasp. We can say, I love you, but I do not need you to survive. I choose you because you amplify my wholeness, not because you patch up my wounds. That paradox, loving without needing, becomes the most sacred form of love. In this state, relationships are no longer cages, but mirrors. They reflect our depth, not our deficiency. They enhance our path, not detour it. There is no fear of abandonment because we no longer abandon ourselves. There is no war of power because both sides have made peace within. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation. It is not about separation from others, but reunion with the self. So let me ask you, have you mistaken the ache for love? Have you sought others to soothe the disowned part of your own soul? What would it feel like to love from abundance, not from fear? What would change if you no longer needed to be chosen because you have already chosen yourself? That is the hidden key to real love, and once it turns, everything opens, not because someone arrived, but because you finally did. What if the deepest heartbreak was never about losing another person, but about losing yourself in the process of trying to be loved? That's the twist life waits for you to see. The ache, the silence, and the solitude were never punishments. They were sacred invitations. Invitations to return to the one person you were always meant to come home to, your truest self. Carl Jung knew that the most powerful story is not the one we live externally, but the one unfolding in the depths of our psyche. The love we endlessly search for in others is often a projection of our own unclaimed soul. We crave connection, not because we're broken, but because we've forgotten that the source of love is within. And until we reconnect with that source, every relationship becomes a mirror of our hunger, not our wholeness. When the begging stops, when you no longer chase texts, question your worth, or bend to please, you begin to taste a love that is no longer conditional. You stop trying to be chosen, and instead you choose yourself. You speak to your soul not with judgment, but with reverence. You see your tears not as weakness, but as proof that you still care deeply. You become your own sanctuary. The solitude you once feared transforms into a sanctuary. The silence you once ran from becomes symphonic. And in that space, you realize your healing was never about erasing the pain, but about meeting it with such presence that it could no longer define you. This is when the soul stops whispering and starts singing. This is the love story no one taught you to write. The one without the fairy tale, the savior, or the happy ending wrapped in someone else's arms. Instead, it is fierce, subtle, and intimate. It is the moment you look in the mirror and finally say, "You are enough, even without them, especially without them." To love yourself is not to reject others, it is to stop rejecting yourself. And in that wholeness, you attract what no longer wounds, but resonates. Not just people, but experiences, opportunities, and energies that reflect your new inner frequency. The right connections find you not because you performed to earn them, but because your truth became magnetic. So choose yourself, not as a rebellion, but as a return. Choose peace over panic, stillness over proving, depth over drama. Because when you do, everything begins to align, not instantly, not perfectly, but authentically. Let this be your final act of courage. Stop begging for love that costs your soul. Start becoming the love that awakens it. You are not waiting for your soulmate, you are becoming them. And that changes everything. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.